Stellar Blade is one of the most overlooked games of 2024 that got a little bit overshadowed by the meme culture that followed it. I've been looking forward to this game since the 2019 Project Eve trailer dropped, and at the time, I knew this was going to be a favorite. It was already tackling a genre of science fiction and monsters, and when later trailers started showing the combat and their cinematic take on it, I knew it was going to be a purchase for me. This is Studio Shift Up's first attempt at a AAA game, and although the game has some concept it doesn't fully flesh out, I believe it is a refreshing take on so many tropes found in the action games nowadays, and they really knocked it out of the park with what they made. This is a broke guy's review of Stellar Blade, letting you know if it's worth your money and time. The story follows Eve, an agent sent from an off-world colony, dropping down in a sci-fi D-Day kind of way on a mission to take back Earth from monsters called Naytibas. This journey will take Eve through several distinct regions as she hunts down an alpha Naytiba she meets early in her journey, who holds the most important secrets for her mission. Some of these secrets she's not ready to find out about and will change everything she knows about herself and the world. You will meet Adam, who is like a handler to Eve. He is someone who has been surviving on the very dangerous Earth since he was born. He helps Eve and gives her information for her mission and generally guides her as she explores dangerous locations few dare go to due to the Naytiba infestation. Lily is another one of Eve's close companions who is an engineer and helps upgrade various gadgets and makes modifications to Eve so she can become stronger. The story will revolve around these three as they try to save humanity and reclaim the Earth. Typically, Eve is alone when she goes into an area, but Adam and Lily will be on comms through the drone that accompanies you. This drone can scan surroundings to help you locate enemies or resources. This game was actually so good that I found myself constantly triggering it. Honestly, I wish that it wasn't so good because instead of looking around at the environment, I found myself just scanning, looking around for pings, and moving on. This drone scan will tell you where everything in the game is, like enemies, chests, and materials. There are no monsters that will pop up on you. You always know it's going to be ahead, and exploring through dungeons and the open world is a little bit less satisfying when you can just pop a scan and know where everything is around you. I really wish that the drone scan was a little bit more limited in its functionality so that maybe enemies that aren't moving can't be seen, and it leaves some of these chests out so exploring every nook and cranny felt like an adventure. Coupled with Adam and Lily constantly telling you what to do and the hint system popping up way too soon when you're met with a puzzle, it felt like there was nothing really kept for me to discover. I had to teach myself to either ignore the hint button popping up, but that didn't really stop Adam and Lily telling me how to solve some puzzles. As you get to know these characters, the more you begin to look forward to story beats just so you can see them trying to decipher what's actually going on around here. The game did leave me wanting more from most of the characters, and I really wish we could have had more dedicated time to them and learn more about their histories and generally bond with them. There are a few character side quests which develop throughout the story. These characters typically have a shop, and the more you spend at their shop, the higher your bond with them gets, and you'll gain access to new voice lines that they have with you. One of these side quests has you helping out a young girl who's running a shop by herself. Sometimes there's an excellent character development moment between characters that would pop a smile on my face, but you kind of notice that they just have weird lines of dialogue and can feel the translation from Korean. But at no point is it actually bad. More of just a, that was a weird way to phrase that. You learn of her sister, who is the one who really ran the shop, but has been missing, and along your journey you look for clues as to what happened to her and where you can find her. There are a few character quests like this that added a bit of depth to the game, but lacked overall. I understand this is the studio's first time making a AAA game, but at a $70 price tag, I think it's reasonable to say that I want as much as you can give in every aspect of a game. The game starts out by holding your hand. Enemies are fairly simple as you learn the mechanics and timing you're going to need for this game. As you progress in the game, you start unlocking core parts of the combat. Things like upgrades to make your dodges and blocks better, and follow-ups for punishes and perfect versions of these dodges and blocks. Although I could find myself learning the mechanics of the game as I went, some part of me wishes a harder game that gave you all of these things from the get-go and enemies that tested your skills as you started to learn the game throughout. I felt like I had to unlock combat slowly and then master it throughout the first half of the game. Some of these core skills that would expand combat are even gated by story events, but once the system is revved up and ready to go, oh man, it felt so clean to go against some of the more difficult enemies and bosses in the game. You feel so cool when you perfect parry an entire combo and follow up with satisfying abilities that do heavy damage, or when you do a perfect dodge to set up for your counter. The near cinematic fights are a highlight in this game. By the time you get to the end of the game, mastered all the mechanics, and created a nice build for your fighting style, you feel epic against the late game enemies and bosses. They become a lot tougher and really ask you to do so much more, which looks and feels amazing. The process of getting your ass beat for the first first time you meet them into learning all of their movesets and having the timing down on dodges, blocks, and attack windows makes you feel like you're truly the boss. I just wish it didn't take the game so long to get to a point where the combat could shine as bright as it did. The combat at the end of the game is truly realized and the most epic I've felt in a combat focused game, but it just takes a while to get to that point with all the holding back that the game does for the first half of the game. The only problems I had with the combat design in the late game was all the ways that the game has built in to make the game a bit easier. You have a revive that you can buy at any point that will kick in whenever you die. Instead of getting the game over screen, you can once per life revive with this item at full health. Additionally, you could stack mods to increase your defenses and shields, which makes you really hard to kill, even from bosses. This really made getting hit a lot less punishing. The part of the game that makes you feel so cool is the combat and the learning as you progress. It's almost like every enemy type was its own puzzle and a boss is the pinnacle puzzle you have to find out. With all the ways to make the puzzle easier, a bit of the satisfaction is lost on getting through them. The combat in this game is really the selling point. It takes a while to get there, but once it's up and rolling, you're really going to feel what the devs spent their effort on. You have a handful of light and heavy attack combos, and you typically want to do the harder combos as they scale to do more damage as the combo goes on. Eventually you'll get an upgrade to be able to hold your last button in every combo string to do bigger damage and fill a couple meters I'll get to later. Some of these combos even have perks that'll boost your attack speed, guarantee a stun on an enemy, and even reposition you to be behind them. Typically I just did the hardest light and heavy attack combos. They take a while to get through, but with the attack damage mods you'll be able to beat a lot of the low and mid tier enemies with one opening. This combo that repositions you always looked cool to do and pull off, but I just found very limited use for it. There are a couple enemies with shields in this game that you need to either break their stance to do heavy damage or attack them when their shield isn't up. It seems like the reposition combos were designed for these enemies, but the problem is when their shields are up, they will just parry you, which will leave you open for an attack. I just never understood when to use this combo when finishing combos is really important because that last charged hit will build up your burst meter. You have two meters in this game, beta energy and burst energy meters. Beta energy skills are small abilities that you can weave into the flow of combat that generate as you hit and shield enemy attacks. You can use mods to generate more meter as you play to use these skills more. These skills will allow you to do powerful follow-up punishes after successful parries and use your beta skills. These skills are chargeable attacks that allow you to do heavy damage, do extra damage to shields, and even stun them to lead to more follow-ups. Your burst energy is kind of like a super. You can spend burst energy after a beta energy counter to do a second, even more stronger counter. But the highlights are the super abilities you can spend the energy on. There are 4 of them that look epic, and when you use the Devil May Cry Virgil super that has you disappear with a bunch of slashes going across the screen and watch health bars disappear, I threw up my hands and I started screaming. The other ones look pretty good visually, and there's even one that just boosts your damage and attack speed for a certain period of time, but I just really wish there was more synergy between your combos and beta and burst skills. I really wanted to use them in tandem with one another, to start with a beta skill to knock them off balance and then follow up with a powerful combo into a super. Really feels like I'm in a fighting game. But the problem is these skills just take so long to pull off that I felt a disconnect here within the combat. I often use my super as a response, abusing the super armor and damage and healing properties that the super has. I really didn't use many of the beta or burst skills because I found that upgrading the ones I liked the most was the most rewarding. It seems like you were supposed to use these skills with the effect in mind, which calls for spreading out your skill points. I just condensed them all into one skill, and at some point it just did the job in any situation. This is why I think that all of these skills should have been unlocked from the start, because I didn't really receive any push from the game to try and problem solve with what the enemies have and what I could use to beat them. This is really important because there are a couple mechanics in the game I really wish were fleshed out. Both you and most of the enemies in the game have a shield. Any damage that isn't perfectly parried will whittle down this shield. While the shield is up, you take reduced damage from all sources. So these skills seem to be the answer in being able to knock down a shield quickly to be able to do decent damage. But why focus on the shield breaking techniques when you could just go for raw damage and one-shot the shield with a decent amount of health? There are mods to do additional damage to shields. I really never saw an opportunity to use these against any regular enemy. I could see you using them for bosses, but I found myself focusing on damage reduction and attack speed mods because damage windows on enemies and bosses become short enough that you can't pull off the longer, more damaging combos without them. During combat, you have a few indicators that give you a hint as to what's coming up next. These indicators show up as flashes and really get you to watch combat as you need to do specific actions. They felt like a manual quick time event, and each of them give you a really cool cutscene. Blue flashes to dodge forward, which would have you like teleport behind the enemy and do a hard punish. Pink flashes that would have you dodge back and make the enemy stumble, but would show a weak spot where you could shoot them with with your ranged weapon, and yellow flashes for unblockables where you have to dodge. This works really well, especially with the red flashes indicating that an enemy is about to do a multi-hit move. You're going to want to try and go for perfect parry. It dictates a flow of combat, and instead of just mashing buttons to do the most damage possible, you are actually watching during combat. I really appreciated the flow and back and forth responses you would have in a fight. The block mechanic was the most interesting take I've seen in a game that doesn't come off as tedious. You can hold the shield button to reduce damage to a certain extent. You have a shield meter that depletes as you take damage. While this shield is up, you will take reduced damage, but if you perfect parry attacks that come your way, not only do you take no damage, but your shield meter doesn't budge. This, in conjunction with the balance meter, truly made blocking the best I've seen in the game. The balance bar on enemies is depleted each time you perfect parry their attack. When this meter is completely out, you can do a critical strike on them for massive damage. With these mechanics in play, I felt like there was a skill developing for blocking rather than mindlessly holding the block button until I was safe again. Not only could I fully negate damage, but if I did this well, I wouldn't miss out on damage I would get for evading in and around an attack coming my way. Being able to perfect parry full combos coming my way made me feel like a god. In a lot of cases, most enemies will die to the critical strike, and this to me was the coolest I felt while putting up a shield. Once you get all of the upgrades acquired and you get to the mid game, bosses is where all of this truly shines. Piecing together that intricate puzzle of attacks and knowing the right response feels like a visceral dance that awed me every time I took part in it. Drone upgrades allow you to unlock new types of ammunition. This was probably a part of the game that I played around with the least because it didn't quite seem to fit the game. They seem to not do enough damage to regular enemies for it to be useful, which is fine because it doesn't allow you to cheese and miss out on the amazing combat of the game, but it does let you cheese a good portion of boss health. Every ammunition type except the basic slug one will stun the boss. This can even stop them mid-animation in an attack. Combined with the type of overdrive mode I'll talk about later, you can stun the bosses for a really long time. It's not to say that there was no good gameplay with the drone projectile mode. There were awesome dungeons that you would explore where due to some interference you weren't able to summon your sword and you could only use the range mode. These levels were always pretty interesting because they have this like horror vibe going on where it felt like you got thrown into a Resident Evil game because it becomes like a third-person shooter with monsters popping out of nowhere and you have to solve puzzles while they try to attack you. It was such an interesting twist that I always loved these levels when they popped up. Probably the most underwhelming part of combat was the overdrive mode you can unlock. I won't be showing any footage of it because it does contain some minor spoilers, but I'll try to describe it with the best of my ability and its failings. When I think of an ultimate transformation, I think of saving a really cool power for like a last man standing situation. This transformation should be something that makes me feel cool to use it in that dire moment, and this is the furthest case in this game. The skill tree up until this point hadn't really irked me, but when you unlock this mode, you have to use skill points to unlock skills that you already have in normal mode. This overdrive mode should have been an addition to your base form, but I felt like it took so much away from you when you first unlocked it. Even when you unlock everything this mode has to offer, some of the harder and cooler combos you get in the base form aren't able to be done in this overdrive form. You can only do the most basic light and heavy combos. You have a couple skills like beta energy skills that you can use with no cooldown but do little to nothing. One thing I noticed about this form is that you can spam the heavy attack on any boss in the game, and for the duration of that form change you can stun lock the boss. I feel like this form was a bit of a waste. Not only does it limit the more advanced techniques, but the efficient way of doing damage isn't through the mechanics the game has established throughout its progression, but doing something cheesy. I wish this was an expanded EVE where I could go all in and do crazy combos linking into my beta skills to have a short amount of time where I felt OP and really cool while doing it. Most of the time, I didn't even want to pop this mode because of how much it took away from the combat and the epic flow some of these bosses have. I feel like this was the biggest miss in the game. There's also this stealth mechanic in the game that you really only get to use in the open world segment. I typically only used it to get rid of troublesome enemies. There's this one ram type enemy that would always rock my shit, and using stealth to take him out in one hit was kind of my go-to. Eventually, you even get an upgrade to allow you to take out two enemies at the same time while in stealth, but never at any point of the game did I think it was designed to be a part of the game. It kind of seemed like it was just added, and I just used it to cheese some enemies that I didn't want to spend the effort on beating. There's also like a jump attack. I legit never used this unless it was by accident. You have a dash attack that'll teleport you right to the enemy, and I use this as my combo starter, so it just never made sense to do a low damage jump attack and then enter into a combo when I could just safely be at a distance and then dash in when I wanted to start. In the game, you can find passcodes that leave you with a clue where to find a chest. Some of these chests even have a small small little mini game for you to play that offered like a 30-second break from the exploring and combat cycles, which was actually pretty nice. I look forward to seeing these chests. They also have upgrades for your recovery items, your sword damage, drone abilities, currencies you could buy different things in the game with. The economy in this game is quite lenient. When I finished the game, I actually had such a surplus of almost every item needed to upgrade the core stat. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I can see why you would have it, so you didn't have to find absolutely everything in the game, but I also wish there was something for me to use it for. Even not having a cap on the things I could upgrade stat-wise would have been nice, but they just sit in my inventory collecting dust towards the end of the game. Another thing that just collected dust were the trap consumables. You have a couple grenades and traps in the game designed to give you an edge in fight, but at no point did I ever think it was a good idea to use it. But at no point did I ever think it was a good idea to stop what I was doing and give an enemy the upper hand on me just to set these things up. They kind of just feel random, and the few times I did use them, they provide such poor results, I might have just not used them at all. Otherwise, the currencies you do gather in the game are kinda useful. You can find unique items scattered around that will increase your max HP and your beta energy meters, but the main appeal is to get new outfits or change your hair that you will need to use some of the materials you find while exploring. Some of these cosmetics have to be bought first with a premium currency called Vitcoins, because in this post-apocalyptic society, only the worst of humanity remains. You still have to build it with another currency you get out in the world. It seemed like a lot of what you're picking up in this game is actually just to build new outfit. The entire system is trivialized because you can just buy these currencies with gold that starts to rain from the sky as you finish quests. At some point in the game, I just bought so much of each currency that I just wouldn't need any of them anymore and could construct anything new on the spot that came up. What I was building was cool, but it falls into that category of I wish there was something to do with all this extra stuff I have. The cosmetic things that you can get are new suits, earrings, face wear, which is like glasses and stuff, and hairstyles. This game got a lot of attention for its clothing decisions, and goddamn were those some distracting decisions. But once you get over the bikini outfits and start unlocking some of the other cool suits the game has to offer, you really start to see the appeal of Dress to Impress. I felt like I was constantly getting new outfits in every area the game has to explore, and will have you running to a checkpoint to see what it looks like. If you told me beforehand, I would be spending hours in this game trying to match my hair with the suit to make sure that I not only slayed the monsters, but the post-apocalyptic Met Gala, I think I would just look at you funny and make the executive decision to avoid you for the time being. Also, her hair tie is a sword. Random, but I got like 20 hours into the game before I realized, and it just doesn't appear in her hand.
This world is full of things to find, and they don't feel like a hassle to get them at all. You'll find that the world is dotted with documents and lore tabs, and you'll want to do a quick skim of each one that you find. These talk about the world, what happened before Eve dropped down, give some environmental flavor to certain parts of the world, and even give you hints on what you might find further down the road you go. This was really cool, but there was a bit of disconnect with the story. There are a few major twists that occur in the game that really had me tilting my head and going, I thought we knew this already. It's hard to feel the emotional gravity of particular moments when you've had that revelation of the plot point hours before it came about in the story. At first, the level design looks like a dungeon-like area that's just a path with a couple other routes to take you to chests and optional stuff. But when you get to the main hub of the game, pick up a few quests, and go out into the world, it feels really guided. What I mean by this is that there are a lot of quests that will take you to the general vicinity of new stuff to explore in the open world sections. I really like this feature because I found myself going to do the quest and then looking around to see what's there rather than just doing a top to bottom clear of the world. In the open world, these areas with loot will actually look different visually, and you'll feel a tug to explore that area. It kind of reminded me of games like Elden Ring, where you would want to turn and go, what's that? And run over to check it out. Having to fight your way through enemies and solve puzzles as you explored and knocking things out one by one and having significant upgrades as far as gear and stats always made me feel like I was being rewarded for my work instead of just wasting my time. All of that said, I feel like the dungeons are where things truly shine for the level design of Stellar Blade. Each and every one of them feels like a Dark Souls-esque map that you explore carefully and thoroughly to make sure that you've gotten everything you need from that area. They pepper in these puzzles and unique enemies in every location, and the puzzles are always a nice break from the game loop, but it was the enemy variety that I truly appreciated. Each enemy in the game is unique in its own way. There are about like 2 or 3 reskins out of the 30 plus enemies, and each of them behave in different ways. To the more simple enemies at the beginning of the game, to the machine enemies, and even the type that infect a corpse that's around and will revive over and over until you get the parasite that wriggles out of it when you defeat an enemy. In this way, each new area not only gives you a very different area to explore visually, but a new experience as each of these zones offers something new. The bestiary is like a puzzle to solve, and with each entry is a refreshing new encounter to explore and learn. The only part about the questing and exploration cycle that I had is the lack of depth in the story. A lot of these quests would have you explore a character's story, but have you do rather simple tasks to lead to some unremarkable finishes. It was always hard to feel invested in these characters when there isn't much to be invested in. The progression system of this game is pretty weird. I feel like they really limit the game until you start getting skill points. It serves as kind of like a tutorial at first, but it holds back that peak combat that you're looking for such a long time. You get skill points for beating enemies and bosses or finishing quests, and although skill points become abundant once you hit a certain part of the game, I feel that up until that point, you're scraping for skill points to be able to do a bit more in combat. The fact that you had to spend skill points to upgrade things like your dodge and your block, and then you had to get a mod to enhance them further, makes me feel like the game was being held back for the sake of progression rather than a progression of that difficulty and skill being the reason why you unlock new avenues of attack and defense. The mods you get are split into two parts: Exospines and Gears. Exospines will dictate the general direction of your build as they have a much stronger benefits that can be upgraded. Gears are more like smaller stat bonuses that will affect your more passive rolls. The second I unlocked an Exospine that boosted my dodge and my block, I feel like I couldn't ever take it off because of how core those two abilities are. There are 9 other Exospines, but the game only started to feel right when I had that equipped. But I don't know, maybe it was a skill issue or something, but I can't imagine how difficult the final couple bosses would have been if I didn't have it. The precise timing that you need for dodges and blocks is so important, as that's what really unlocks the combat and it's core to the identity of this game. The gears are a little bit more interesting because they have multiple tiers that can stack. Each time that I gained a gear that would greatly increase my attack at the cost of me taking more damage, I thought it was worth it. I ended up stacking 3 of these with an attack speed boost by the end of the game, but these gears can range from higher combo damage, more defense, better shield damage, attack speed, and so on and so forth. Although it's not really build crafting, it was nice to look at the gears and tailor something more to my playstyle. When I first watched the music video before the game release, my first thought was, what the fuck? But I think that video really sets up the score for Stellar Blade really well. The entire time while I was playing, I felt like I was in something K-pop concert adjacent. This was a very different type of score that you're not used to seeing in video games. I'm not really sure how to explain this, but it's just a completely different vibe. Throughout the entire story, you have music that plays and evolves as you go. Each location has its own songs, and each boss theme really sets the tone of the fight you're about to get into. Sometimes you have a really chill and serene vocal pieces playing as you explore that'll pick up when you get into a fight, and other times you'll have electronic hard rock. And there was this one boss that had like this crazy nightcore dubstep kind of thing going on, and it just amps you for how awesome that fight is. The soundtrack definitely had me going back and finding the bangers to give a listen as I worked. Stellar Blade is a game that had some really awesome moments and truly makes you feel like the combat expert your character is supposed to be, but in many aspects it feels like there are some things that were being held back and ideas that aren't fully fleshed out. I know I ranted about a lot of the failings of this game, but make no mistake, it is a very good game. It just missed out on a lot of its potential of being one of the greats. But overall, I really did have a good experience. There were a lot of refreshing takes on common tropes and other action games that I think a sequel could blow them out of the water. For the studio's first foray into the AAA space, I think they've done really well with themselves and makes me look forward to what they will make in the future. I bought this game for $50 and spent about 35 hours in it, and although I don't regret that price and time one bit, the game is selling for $70. I don't think any game is worth that much. If you can find this game at a $40 price tag, I think it's absolutely worth it. And if you don't mind a little bit of an extended tutorial, I think this game is worth both your time and your money.